Well, Mark, for those who don't know, just tell us a bit about your background, both pre and since you've been at the GBGB.
Okay, well, for the last 2 years I've been the Director of Regulation, so the role there is about making sure that the sport is regulated in the way it should be, around integrity, welfare, etc. Before that, and knowing nothing about greyhound racing coming into that job, I was a police officer for 30 years, mainly worked in London. My last command was the task force, which is marine, air support, dogs, and also the territorial support group. So there's about 1,200 officers, 22 bases across London, which you could say is chalk and cheese with greyhound racing, but there's a lot of similarities.
So as a newbie to the sport, what was your perception coming in?
I'd probably been in fact I'd only been to Romford on a social, so I only had that side of it. I don't think I even stayed the night because obviously I couldn't then, but realistically I think my perception was probably the same as a lot of other people outside of the sport, which is that greyhounds are raced, and then there's a dubious retirement around them. There's a load of ne'er-do-wells that are involved in the sport. That's the perception. The actual reality to that is fundamentally different. It's a far better industry than I gave it credit for coming into it, and now I'm a great supporter of it and have a real passion for what's going on.
I want to address what is a bit of an elephant in the room here, which is, of course, that the Greyhound Board has been seen by many to be overpowered by promoters over the years. You're coming in as your own boss, but of course you're married to a promoter who is also on the board. Does that leave you with a bit of a professional and personal conundrum?
Well, put it this way, what happens at work stays at work. So in terms of when we get home, it's completely different. But I think what most people are looking at is the conflict of interest around that. Now, as Director of Regulation, that was no different. And so what we did was anything that had any bearing on that particular track, which is Nottingham, obviously, as most people know, was dealt with by the CEO, as was. And that's changed slightly in so much as obviously stepping up to become the Managing Director. Anything that has any bearing on Nottingham whatsoever will be dealt with by our interim chair, who most people know is a Queen's Counsel. So in terms of decisions and delegations around that will be dealt with by the chairman.
What about general views on the sports and big decisions that you're going to have to make? Will there be any influence there?
What, from the promoters?
Yes.
I think most people who know me and have known me over the last 2 years will realise that, at the end of the day I have to be even-handed. So, but actually my concerns around some of the promoters are the same as other people. So that I can't see it have any bearing whatsoever.
Obviously the board's changed a lot over recent months. How do you intend to shape it more going forward?
Okay, well, straight away, as you said, it's changed, and it will probably continue to change if the truth be known as well. Going forward, as you said, we're already one short of one independent member, so I'm keen to make sure that we try and recruit someone into that post, and that will clearly be a non-promoter. I think with the owner representative on there and the practitioner representative, I think there's a fresh look at it. I think my role going in as the new managing director is to apply even more of a fresh look at what we do and how we do it. I'm keen, and I think the board are keen from what I said in the presentation I gave to them, that we start off initially with a piece of work looking at a 3 to 5 year plan about how we can take the industry forward. So, and that builds in with a whole raft of things that I've had frustrations over the last 2 years where we can start to work on now.
You mentioned you've been frustrated slightly over the last couple of years. Is it a job that you're enjoying as well?
What, my old job or the new one?
Or both? An organisation you're enjoying being a part of a sport as well?
I love the sport. I really enjoy that side of it. I think we've been hampered a little bit in terms of external forces coming in terms of whether there's not sufficient funding that we can start to make the welfare advancements that we want to do. That, as you know, is now starting to change, and so as a result of that's some of my frustration. Some of it is about actually inertia on the part of the board as well, that actually we're not seen to be doing enough. And I think the frustration that I have is that, as I said to you before, in my previous job, trying to communicate to 22 bases across London, I thought it would be a really easy sell when I came to the Greyhound Board. It's really not. I think currently GBGB, the perception is that we're not good communicators. We need to do a lot more in that.
What do you want to do about that?
Look, anyone who knows me over the last 2 years, I very rarely like to sit in the office. I like to get out and about and go about. We've got fantastic field staff that are out there that are interacting with trainers and owners on a day-by-day basis. I actually want the board, and myself especially, to be a lot more visible in terms of going out and speaking to people. And I genuinely hope that people will come forward and say, look, Mark, can we have a word? We need to be more listening around what people have got to say as well.
There have been complaints in some corners that this job, your job, wasn't advertised externally, which kind of feeds into this idea that the GBGB is a bit of a closed shop. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd like to say it's a huge conspiracy just to get me promoted into the post, but that wasn't the case. The board took the decision not to spend thousands of pounds going to headhunters to try and find someone that was right for the job. And don't forget, GBGB is a not-for-profit organisation, so we're not paying massive wages to people. So the idea of going out and trying to recruit someone for £500,000 a year is never going to happen. So obviously they've been impressed with me over the last 2 years, and their thoughts were, actually, we don't need to do that as a process. They asked me to present my ideas before they actually offered me the job. They've accepted probably unanimously most of those ideas that are in there, and that's why I've ended up getting the job.
And you actually were slightly surprised by that. You said you were expecting some sort of a kickback from your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely, but there again, we've just already discussed about how the board is starting to move forward now. So I think some of the innovation and some of the things that I've seen over the last 2 years and that I want to start pushing forward now, I think that there is a lot of there's a keenness on the part of the board to take that forward as well.
We'll touch on individual issues, but what are the most pressing issues for you?
Okay, well, the obvious thing for us is about the welfare and integrity of the sport. I think if you go back 10 years and said where greyhound racing was and where it is now, it's advanced massively. But that doesn't mean to say that we're there. We know what our Achilles heels are in this industry. It's about retirements, it's around euthanasias, and it's around injuries. They are the things that those who are opposed to greyhound racing would see us finish the sport off tomorrow if they had the chance. So I think for us, it's about actually having a firm plan about how we're going to address that. So if we know what the percentage of dogs that are being euthanized in this industry are, and those are legitimate, which is an issue in itself, but if they are legitimate, about what we can do as an industry to try and reduce that over the next 3 to 5 years.
And those stats are going to be available from next year?
Well, the injury stats are going to be available in the first quarter of next year, as we've agreed to do that as a result of the AFRA committee. When they're published, just to publish them, I think will fall in the hands of the welfare groups, but more especially the anti-greyhound. So I think we, as GBGB and the board, and the industry have got a firm plan going forward as to how we're going to start to reduce on those.
The media rights deal has come to a head over recent months. How important do you see TV coverage of greyhound racing as being?
I think it's critical in terms of what it does. I mean, Sky clearly as a showcase, but you've got RPG TV out there as well. It's one of those things that if fewer and fewer people are going to the track, other than going into bookmaker shops, it allows people to turn on the TV, if they're on Sky, for example, and watch what's going on around the actual side itself. So it's a good showcase for greyhound racing.
Will the GBGB get involved in making sure that the TV coverage still happens?
I think we've got no option but to get involved with it. I mean, there is a lot of unanswered questions out there. The issues between SIS and ARC aren't resolved in terms of who's got what media coverage of that. We might, beginning of next year, have 2 services that are being put out to the bookmakers. But there's another load of questions in terms of, excuse me, about what's going to happen around the Sky funding. So GBGB could be a conduit for that, or we could actually negotiate that through by talking to the individual bookmakers. So I met with SIS today. I'm going to have conversations with Bags going forward as well to see what, if anything, we can do to apply some leverage around that. But in terms of how important it is, they're all showcases for greyhound racing.
How concerned are you at this stage about next year's open race schedule?
We've still got some time. I mean, I know that some of the staff here have been chasing up the respective parties to try and see what their fixture lists are. And again, I've had those conversations with SIS today, but I'm confident that we will be in a position to get those in on time.
Of course, Coyle and Ladbrokes have now pledged to pay a levy on their online bets, which is great news for the sport. Hopefully more will follow. How important do you think that is?
It's critical to what we're trying to do. Our ambition around, as I said about the welfare, next year we've got the British Standards Institute PAS coming in, which is this technical specification for residential trainers' kennels. And again, that's going to need an inordinate amount of money to try and bring people up to that particular standard. So any new income, which is what we've been pressing for the last 2 years, any new income will very much probably be weighted towards those sort of kennel improvements. So it's critical for us, and obviously what follows with the Ladbroke Coral announcement is that we truly hope that other bookmakers will follow suit.
So from what you're saying, the priority for any new funding is going to be welfare?
Not necessarily, it's going to be around welfare, but there will be other aspects we'll put to it as well.
What are your views on welfare standards at the moment?
Again, if you look back 10 years, they're fields apart from where they were. My issue is, and again I've seen this at first hand by going out, and also the investigations that we've had around where kennel standards have fallen far below, and welfare standards for that matter. So I think we're in a much better place than we were, but I think I'd be kidding you to say that there's not an awful lot more that we've got to do about it. Clearly there is. Do
you think too many greyhounds are put to sleep for economic reasons?
I don't have a personal view on that, But what I do have is this whole aspect about it's no good just saying that this is our particular figure. My understanding is that the figures have gone down in, say, the last 5 years. As an industry, we've got to have an ambition to get the euthanasia rate down further than what it is now, which is why the overall 3 to 5 year plan needs to come in, but also the fact that we've now got this welfare strategy that has to be launched and has to have some good targets set aside to it as well.
You said that you've been out to visit many kennels, and obviously you have your stipendiary stewards out and about regularly. Kennel standards includes a variety of things, doesn't it? Not just the actual kennel buildings, but also the care of the greyhounds, and you've got some ambitions around that.
Going back to the BSI, that's a technical specification. So what DEFRA wanted us to do was come up with if you want to build yourself a kennel, so they should look like X, Y, and Z. When we've had the contributions from the welfare groups on it, and they've been on all the steering group meetings that we've had, clearly there was an appetite, as with our own staff in GBGB, to make sure that there was also the other aspects, the husbandry of animals, the care and control of them as well. So some of that's been built into the BSI, but the rest of that is going into a code of practice, which we're also developing at the same time. That within that code, it will talk about the rudimentaries, the basics about how you would care for greyhounds in kennels, and that goes from everything from teeth to socialisation to how much time they spend out in the paddocks, etc. So I think that's a really useful thing that we're doing on top of what we were asked to do by the government.
You mentioned that at times you felt a little bit frustrated here, perhaps because of external forces or whatever that may be, but would you like to see the governing body be able to be a bit more forceful?
It really depends on what you mean by more forceful. I think we should be far more visible than we've ever been before. I think we need to be a lot more communicative to people, and that's at all stakeholders, be it trainers, owners, stadia, etc. In terms of forceful, if you're talking about from a regulatory point of view, then next year our ambition again is to change the way that we do disciplinary hearings. Trainers would know that if they are subject to disciplinary and they are found on that, they'll know exactly what they're going to be sanctioned with as well. That in the past hasn't existed, which is again a big fear on the part of trainers as to what happens. So it's about us trying to again promote what we're doing in an open way. But in terms of being forceful, I think there are powers that the Stipes have out there. We can, let's be fair, we can suspend someone's licence, and if it's your livelihood, that's a massive issue for the industry to do that. But we have done. And in fact, we have done on 3 occasions in the last year.
There have been issues around rumours, or I'm not sure if you have evidence or not, but greyhounds being sent to countries like China. What are your views on it, and what can be done to stop it? Okay,
well, GBGB's made their point really clear on this, that actually if we find any evidence whatsoever that trainers or owners are sending their dogs direct to China, then we will deal with them under the rules of racing. It doesn't stop there, clearly, because obviously dogs can go through a third party to get to Ireland, and then on to China, for example. And we've had some evidence of that. And where that's happened, we've approached trainers and owners, and we've told them that we're aware of what's happening. It may well be that we're even at that time informing them that's where their dog has ended up. But what we're actually saying at that particular point is that if there's any further dogs that go through that particular conduit, then we will deal with them under the rules. So I think we've been very clear on that. We've worked with colleagues in Ireland as well, if it is the route that they're going through, to try and tie those areas off as best we can. But there are other areas other than China that dogs could actually be sent to. And again, the welfare standards in those particular countries, in some cases, are fairly good whilst they're racing. And I suppose the ethical argument from our point of view is how far do you do it? Because we're there for when they come in from registrations, we're there for when they retire. And morally, in certain cases where we have the information or intelligence, we are following down those other cases as well and dealing with them under the rules.
Is it something you're confident that you can stop?
Stop? No, not without support from other areas as well. We've had certain airliners that have turned around as a result of some of the actions that we've done, who've refused to take dogs. But I don't think we can ever plug that hole unless things change in other countries as well. But we're keen to work with other stakeholders around that.
What is your relationship like with the Retired Greyhound Trust, or the Greyhound Trust as they're now known? And do you think, perhaps some of this new funding, might it head their direction so that they can maybe do more?
It's a possibility in terms of what happens with the new money that comes in and the amount of money that's coming in as well. From our point of view, I think a conversation I had with the CEO of the Greyhound Trust some months back was that we only really talk to them when we were in crisis. We've had a trainer, for whatever reason, has decided to pack up, and we've got 40 dogs that are sat there waiting to be rehomed. And I kind of get that to a degree. So I'm very keen to start to strengthen our relationship with the Greyhound Trust, but also other charities as well that rehome greyhounds for a start. I think there's more that we can do in terms of being proactive around that as well. But as you know, that there's at one time there's probably about 1,000 greyhounds that are sat within kennels that are affiliated to the Greyhound Trust. The bigger problem for the industry that we've got, and that I face along with the staff here, is that we've probably got about 4 times that amount, 4,000 dogs that are probably sat in trainers' kennels at the moment. And again, if they're sat there, that's less income for the trainers, unless they're being paid for by the owners, because they're having to feed, exercise, and look after those dogs. And I think, not in the main, but in certain circumstances, those dogs don't have a great quality of life either. So our ambition again is to try and see if we can actually resolve that.
And what is the simple answer to that? Is it just that we need more homes?
I think the Greyhound Trust do really good work, as do some of the other charities. I think you talked about perceptions at the beginning. I think the perceptions of greyhounds are that they're not necessarily great pets, that they're going to rip the family pet up the moment they get in there, and they're going to need loads of exercise. And yet we all know that that's not the case. So I know the Greyhound Trust has some ambition of trying to change that perception, and for that they need extra money. So I think it's a question of trying to promote greyhounds as family pets. Because let's face it, those people who have greyhounds tend to have greyhounds on and on continually. So it's just a question of trying to debunk the myth.
Another issue that I'm sure you've given plenty of thought to is a potential shortage of greyhounds with the amount of racing that we have now. Is that going to be a big issue going forward in your view?
Well, I think it is. You've touched already on the issue between SIS and ARC. The meeting I had today with SIS was very much around about capability and capacity of the greyhounds that are out there. Obviously, SIS are looking at their fixture list at the moment, and our concern was have they got enough greyhounds to be able to fulfil that? They're assuming that they have. But again, our concerns go beyond just the simple numbers. It's about how many times have they raced, what's the injury and attrition rate like as well, because that will all impact in terms of them being able to fulfil their fixtures for the bookmakers. But from our point of view, it does start to impact on welfare and integrity again.
Taking over a new job like this with a police investigation going on probably isn't ideal, is it?
Listen, the police investigation's been going on for well over a year now, or so we're led to believe. We've cooperated them when we've had to, but we're in the dark in terms of where their investigation leads with this. So at the end of the day, we will face whatever, if anything, the police actually come back with.
But it doesn't affect what you're doing now today?
No, not at all, not at all. It's something we'd rather didn't happen, but there are people out there who have obviously got their own views on that. And obviously our ambition is that at the end of the day, there'll be no wrongdoing put up by the police, and that'll be the matter at an end.
You've obviously talked a lot about welfare and integrity, and I think it's widely acknowledged that the GBGB regulates the sport really well. Mm-hmm. Often a criticism flung at you is that there's not enough promotion, and indeed on your website it says that you are intending to be a leader for commercial development and growth of the sport. Do you think there needs to be more promotion coming from within?
Okay, it's one of the questions I asked the board, funnily enough, in terms of what is it they actually want from me as the managing director, but also from GBGB wider. Is it about the marketing? Is it about the promotion of the sport? And they are keen to explore that first and foremost. But with the actual promotion itself, I mean, one of the things that we looked at is about how we can start to professionalise some of the sport. In the past, there's been the NVQs in kennel hands and things like that, and again, it was mentioned by the owner's rep and also by the trainer's rep about, can we not look at things like apprenticeships for people who are coming into the sport, which is, on the face of it, look quite complicated. But one of the things that I've said, and I'm probably going to use it as a mantra, is just because it's difficult doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do it. And already we're starting to get into advanced talks with companies now about how we can bring apprenticeship schemes into the greyhound industry, which would be a huge positive for people in terms of what their ambitions are around it. But also, one would hope, if there's more money sloshing around the sport, that actually we're paying the going rate, or the industry's paying the going rate for those people who are in the sport as well, at kennel hand level. And
in terms of marketing, is that something you're going to be looking at?
I haven't got a definitive answer on that yet back from the board. I know that they're certainly keen to look at the marketing, and aside marketing, the sponsorship side of it as well. Whether or not that becomes a GBGB responsibility or whether or not that sits with the promoters is a matter to be concluded.
So to conclude, in your honest opinion, does the sport have a stable and secure future, perhaps even a prosperous future?
I'm an optimist rather than a pessimist. There's a number of different things that are out there that serve as indicators as to where we're going to go. I disagree with a lot of colleagues who talk about that this is a diminishing sport, it's a dying sport, whichever way you want to clothe that. And I think if we can get the right people in the right environment, and we can get sustained funding from the bookmakers, then anything is possible. It may well mean that there are the continuing decline in people who are going to stadiums, but it doesn't mean to say that online and elsewhere that greyhound racing, and certainly licensed greyhound racing, couldn't prosper.
You've got a pretty big job on your hands, haven't you?
Yeah, it's enough to keep me awake at nights without actually talking to my wife.